We are now being joined by retired Colonel David DeRoche. He's also a professor of Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies at National Defense University. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us on WION this morning. The United States seems to be worried that strikes on Russian early warning system could alter the strategic stability between Moscow and Washington. Why is that?
Good question. So when you look at nuclear deterrence, in order to have stability in a realm where both countries have substantial nuclear forces, you really have to have visibility on what each country is doing. So if Russia's nuclear detection radars are blinded, then they have to resort to other less accurate methods. And the fear is that they will mistake innocent activity for some sort of nuclear activity and escalate. But it's worth noting that these radars are focusing south, where the United States doesn't have any fixed nuclear launch facilities. They were originally planned in the 60s when we had a strategic air command base in Saudi Arabia. We had nuclear missiles in Turkey. The radars under question here, at least from an American perspective, are aimed at an area that we don't have fixed launchers. And then the second thing is that there was a regime whereby the United States would inspect Russian positions and the Russians would inspect American positions that the Russians walked away from. So we could perhaps reestablish that on-site inspection as a means of mitigating the damage from weapons that the Russians have been using in the war in Ukraine.
And Colonel, as you well know, there is this debate about how Ukraine should utilize the weapons that it receives from the West in its fight against Russia. What happens if Ukraine is given the green light to use Western weapons inside Russian territory? And could there be any repercussions?
Good question. So I think based on past practice, the answer, what would happen, would be not much. When Russia initially invaded Ukraine and sought to annex, in what is quite frankly a colonial action, sought to annex about 25% of Ukraine. Russia initially accompanied that with the threat of nuclear escalation. And at every step of the way and periodically, Russia has been threatening this. This is clearly more of a psychological method aimed at undermining Western support for Ukraine's sovereignty. But when you start, and it's also worth noting that the Ukrainians launched a long-range strike against Engels Air Base, which was Russia's premier long-range nuclear launch facility, but it had also been used to launch missiles against Ukraine. So this has been going on for some time. There have been attacks against their deterrence. The Ukrainian position is that, look, Russia is massing forces on our border and is firing into Ukraine from Russia, and we're prevented from responding to that. So they're using strategic depth as a means of conducting tactical operations. If the restrictions were lifted, and I think they probably should be, you could mitigate this by, for example, saying, okay, we can only attack within the range of these Russian glide bombs, say 200 miles within Ukraine. I'm just throwing out random numbers, but you could say, look, this is the danger area, and push, establish a degree of danger for Russian forces operating in Ukraine. But these long-range radars, which are being used to guide glide bombing launched aircraft, which Ukraine has no means of countering at the moment, this is a threat here. I think that if we were to engage the strategic concerns in a meaningful manner, things like perhaps temporarily allowing Russian inspectors at U.S. nuclear facilities, we could mitigate this, assuming the Russian threat and the Russian concerns are raised in good faith. I think it's an open question as to whether they are making a good faith argument or just trying to scare people in the West.
Yeah, such valid points. Colonel, thank you so much for joining us. David B. DeRoche from Washington, D.C. I look forward to speaking to you again very soon.
Thanks, Susan.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.